She's got it. She's got it. Congratulations, guys. That was fantastic.
The Autonomous Soaring Project has one simple goal, is to program a small UAV to soar in thermals similar to the way a glider pilot or birds do. It has been reprogrammed to automatically detect that it's in an updraft and then use that updraft by circling. There's a wide variety of applications for this technology to help UAVs do things like forest fire detection, police surveillance, border patrol, and weather monitoring.
If the aircraft was damaged, you don't have to necessarily just rely on the pilot to compensate and fly the airplane. Adaptive flight controls, autonomous flight controls, different things where we're using the airplane to assist the pilot.
It will take over basically the controls of the airplane as far as flight stability.
The Platform Precision Autopilot is capable of staying on a given path within about 15 feet. It allows the synthetic aperture radar system to fly over essentially the same path more than once. This obviously has some potential applicability when you're looking at Earth's surface movements, such as after an earthquake, or if you're looking at an ice pack melting.
For the F-16, we went out and tested the system and based them on actual mishap cases. It prevented every single mishap. What we're developing here is merely an aid should the pilot get distracted or disoriented. By automating it, we can take out the pilot reaction time entirely.
The computer takes full control away from the pilot for a very brief period of time, and it redirects the trajectory of the aircraft to save the human.
ADS-B is automatic dependent surveillance broadcast. It's equipment on board an airplane that transmits its position and velocity information twice per second.
We were really trying to prove that we could use ADS-B as a way to do coordinated flight between multiple vehicles.
This system is present on a lot of manned aircraft, but we were one of the first UAS to perform testing of it in the national airspace. NASA has a project for integrating UAS.
So one day, UAS could hopefully fly with other commercial airlines and everybody will fly together safely.
There's various benefits to integrating unmanned aircraft, being able to monitor specific weather systems, monitor fires, delivering packages to your doorstep.
Operations to deliver medical emergency supplies, infrastructure, surveillance, and monitoring.
The technical side is a big challenge, but being able to integrate them safely is maybe even a bigger challenge.
To have thousands of these vehicles flying at the same time, you're going to have a lot more automation on the vehicle and in the airspace system.
Regulations for operations of the vehicle, regulations for airspace, regulations for infrastructure.
These aircraft are going to be highly autonomous, piloted, optionally piloted, unpiloted vehicle.
It's not just looking at the UAM, it's actually integrating the small UAS, the package delivery, or even the larger cargo delivery.
Subscale aircraft, we use those for a variety of reasons, to test things like new technology, which could be hardware or software, or even a completely new vehicle. You can do almost anything you want without much risk, and you can realize those gains very quickly. We're researching some level of autonomy. The aircraft, in most cases, are capable of taking off, flying around and landing without any human intervention. Things like ardupilots and multi-rotors and flying computers are allowing kids to play with research type tools that they never had access to before. So it's sort of driving in this new robotic learning type environment that never did exist.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space. And none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I'm Wendell Mendel, a planetary scientist retired from NASA. I'm here today to talk to you about the environment on the lunar surface. Let's start with a question. Where are you? The answer I'm kind of looking for, which no one is going to give, is I'm in the universe. Now, that answer has probably no more information in it than the answer here, because everybody's in the universe. What I want to make is that when you live here on planet Earth, you really aren't too much aware of the universe unless you go out on a dark night and see the stars in the sky. And even then, you don't have a sense of the universe. The reason is that the Earth, with its atmosphere and its geomagnetic field, and even the Sun with its magnetic field, put us in a cocoon that protects us from the universe. But once we get outside of all of that and get on some place like the surface of the moon, the universe is actually on our doorstep. So what property of the universe is important? First of all, the universe is cold. The cosmic background radiation that permeates the universe is at an effective temperature of 2.7 Kelvin, so everything radiates heat away to the universe. Now, on the moon, engineers have to make use of that property because normally when they design equipment to dissipate heat, such as habitats or motors or electrical circuits, on the Earth they have some way to carry that heat away using the atmosphere or maybe conduction into the ground. But on the moon, none of that really works. So the main reason, the main mechanism for dumping heat is radiation to the universe. Radiation is a fairly inefficient way of transferring heat, so quite often engineers have to design quite large radiators in order to pump the heat into them and then radiate it away, and that presents sometimes a design problem for what they want to do. Coming in from the universe, the next part of the cosmos that affects people on the moon is the Milky Way galaxy. The galaxy generates highly charged energetic particles called galactic cosmic rays. They are accelerated by the magnetic fields in the galaxy, and they come in at high energies into our solar system. It's protons and electrons, but the really dangerous particles are highly ionized atomic nuclei. And if one of those comes into your body, it can destroy DNA and cause various havoc, molecular havoc inside your body that is very difficult to repair. So over time, exposure to the galactic cosmic ray flux predicts cancer, other sorts of damage to the blood-forming organs. So it's something that takes prolonged exposure to really be dangerous, but in general, people should be shielded from it, and the shielding is a bit of a problem. On the Earth, the atmosphere shields us from galactic cosmic rays with some help from the geomagnetic field and the solar wind. But on the moon, it strikes whatever is there, and so the traditional way to, say, protect a habitat module on the moon was to pile material on it from the moon. The material on the surface of the moon is called the regolith. I'll talk about that in a minute. And after you put a meter or so of regolith on top of a habitat, the elements from the galactic cosmic rays are indeed stopped. The problem is that the high energy particles can hit nuclei inside the shielding material and create radioactivities that decay and produce neutrons. And eventually there is a sea of neutrons which doesn't interact well with the shielding or with the habitat structure and comes in, and sometimes the neutrons are even more dangerous to human beings than the galactic cosmic rays. So right now the best ideas are that there is some kind of high density shielding with a hydrogenated material inside, like plastic or water or even human fecal matter, to keep people from being exposed to the neutrons. Moving in from the galaxy, the next environmental factor that we have to talk about is being in the solar system itself. The plasma that flows through the solar system is called the solar wind. It pushes back the interstellar medium and creates a bubble around the sun that we call the heliosphere. And so within the heliosphere, the main charged particles are those from the solar wind. The solar wind consists of two components. The low-speed solar wind is always flowing from the sun at a speed of about 400 kilometers per second. But occasionally there are eruptions out of coronal holes in the sun that create a high-speed solar wind that comes out at about a factor of 2 faster. The ions in the solar wind are overwhelmingly protons and electrons, but it also contains ionized nuclei, various other elements, and those gases impact the moon, and the grains on the lunar surface contain solar wind, and that is actually considered to some extent to be a resource because the moon is so deficient in volatiles that the solar wind gases in the upper surface can be mined in principle. The solar wind also interacts with the Earth's magnetic field, and the pressure from the solar wind distorts the Earth's magnetic field and causes it to stream out behind the Earth in the direction opposite from the sun, creating a configuration called the magnetotail. And the moon, at 60 Earth radii from the sun, passes through the magnetotail once a month, and so the charging environment on the surface of the moon, its interaction with the plasmas, changes with time, whether it's in or outside of the magnetic field. In addition to the normal solar wind, there are occasional explosions on the sun that can spew large fluxes of very high energy ions, primarily protons. These are called solar particle events, and the energy and the flux of particles is so high that it can be literally deadly to humans and can cause fatalities. A particularly dangerous solar particle event occurred between the Apollo 16 and the Apollo 17 missions, and had it occurred during either one of those missions, there may have been fatalities of the astronauts. This is a problem on the surface of the moon because when the solar particle events occur, astronauts have to take shelter. The problem is that there really aren't warnings for the solar particle events. The astronauts, therefore, have to have some sort of detector of the X-rays that precede the events, which take about 8 minutes to come from the sun. Then the solar particles themselves arrive in another 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and that is the time the astronauts have to take shelter. Unfortunately, solar particle events can last anywhere from hours to days, and so an astronaut just simply can't go and hide under some kind of overhang because the length of the event may be too long. The other property of the sun, which is important to the moon, of course, is sunshine. And the whole spectrum of the solar radiation hits the moon, whereas on the Earth, much of it is filtered out so that we only see the visible light at certain bands in the infrared, and particularly the ultraviolet is shielded when we live on the Earth. On the moon, the whole thing hits, and so this is not unusual in any kind of space travel, so engineers in general understand how to deal with the full electromagnetic radiation. But of course it obviously has effects on humans or equipment or materials that are exposed to it for long periods of time. The solar radiation is essentially that of a black body, and it follows the typical physics black body curve. The peak of the radiation is somewhere in the near infrared, but it has significant components in the visible and out into the thermal infrared. The unfiltered ultraviolet and X-ray radiation can be dangerous, and of course you shield against that, but this is a problem that's faced by any kind of spacecraft, any kind of operations in space, so engineers know how to deal with it. I hope everyone knows that a full moon occurs when the moon is on the opposite side of the Earth from the sun. So the same thing happens if you live on the moon and can see the Earth. The disk of the Earth in the sky, in other words, its moon, quote unquote, is about 4 times as large as the moon as seen from the Earth. The Earth is also brighter because it has a higher albedo. So the Earth light that shines on the moon during the lunar night can be quite bright and almost suitable for operations. In fact, on a very clear night when the moon is new, you can vaguely see the outline of the moon. It's called the old moon in the arms of the new. And the fact that you can see this dark part of the moon at all is due to the fact that the planet Earth is reflecting light onto the moon and then reflecting it back to where you can see it. The environment in the solar system consists of a lot of junk that's floating around the sun. The planets and their moons and the asteroid belt are pretty well behaved, but there's a lot of other stuff that can be floating around and come in at high velocities and impact the moon. And in fact, the moon is impacted quite frequently, but with submicroscopic dust particles. So these very tiny particles tend to erode the surface, form very small pits on the grains. But every so often, something of significant size comes in and throws up material which we call ejecta. The flux of meteoroids and larger bodies is about the same as we experience in geosynchronous orbit on the Earth. The Earth's atmosphere protects us from these most meteoroids up to a pretty good size. But as I said, they all hit the moon. The micrometeoroid impacts, which maybe cause only small pits, also have an effect on the surface grains of the moon, and sometimes can take some of the smaller grains and weld them into unusual glassy structures called agglutinates. Agglutinates are important to scientists who are studying the lunar soil, but that's beyond the scope of this talk. One of the things we're interested in is how often something large hits the moon, because that's when the crater is formed and ejecta is thrown out and could provide a hazard for habitats or people on the surface. In recent years, a telescope at the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center has monitored the moon when it's new and can see flashes of light from impacts. So we see maybe something like 100 flashes over 30 months. Problem is, no one knows how large the objects are that hit the moon and cause these flashes. Now, the risk to an astronaut or to a habitat from a direct hit is really quite small. It's the ejecta we worry about. At this point, I should mention that the surface of the moon, which has been subjected to impact for the history of the solar system, consists of broken pieces of rock, and we have a special term for it called regolith, which has an etymology that means broken rock. So every particle on the moon was once the piece of something larger, and the sizes go from submicroscopic micron-sized particles all the way to huge boulders. And it's completely unsorted in the sense that there aren't layers of particles. There's just a jumble of everything. It's a quite unusual surface to work with, and so engineers have to become familiar